The little diner sat unusually quiet that evening, an eerie stillness hanging in the air. Olivia, a 27-year-old waitress with weary eyes but an undeniably warm heart, methodically wiped down the counter. She stole a glance at the clock and let out a soft sigh. Another painfully slow night. Business had been dragging, tips had been dismal, and the stack of unpaid bills at home was growing taller by the day. Just as she turned to take a much-needed seat, the front door groaned open, its hinges protesting against the silence. A small figure stood hesitantly in the doorway, a boy, no older than 7. His clothes were rumpled, his hair an unkempt mess, and his tiny hands clutched his stomach as if trying to quiet his hunger. His large, frightened eyes darted nervously around the dimly lit room, uncertainty written all over his delicate face. Olivia's heart squeezed at the sight. He looked so small, so lost, so alone. She immediately stepped forward, lowering herself to his level, her voice soft and reassuring. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said gently, her warm brown eyes searching his. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The boy hesitated, his lower lip trembling slightly before he finally spoke. I don't know where my mommy and daddy are," he whispered, his voice hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in hours. "I'm hungry." Something inside Olivia snapped. She had seen struggling families before, tired workers scraping by on minimum wage, but there was something different about this child. This wasn't just hunger, this was abandonment. He was alone in the world at this moment. And she couldn't ignore that. She didn't even hesitate. "Come on, kiddo," she said softly, holding out her hand. "Let's get you something to eat." She led him to a cozy booth by the window, where the neon lights from the street outside flickered faintly. Within moments, she placed a steaming bowl of soup and a perfectly grilled cheese sandwich in front of him. The boy's eyes widened, his small hands shaking as he picked up the spoon. The second the warm broth touched his lips, his shoulders relaxed, the tension in his tiny frame dissolving with each bite. "Do you know your name?" Olivia asked softly, watching him with quiet concern. He nodded between spoonfuls. "Ethan." She smiled. "That's a nice name, Ethan. Do you remember where you last saw your parents?" Ethan slowed his chewing, his small brows knitting together in thought. He lowered his gaze to his lap, his fingers curling into his shirt. "At the mall," he murmured. "Mommy told me to stay close, but I saw a puppy across the street. I wanted to pet it." His voice wavered, cracking with guilt. "When I turned around, they were gone." His small chest rose and fell with quick breaths. "I walked for a long time, but I don't know where I am now." Olivia's heart ached. A lost child, wandering the streets alone. Anything could have happened to him. But somehow, fate had brought him here. Without wasting a second, she grabbed the phone and called the police to report a missing child. As the minutes stretched into an hour with no news, she noticed Ethan struggling to keep his eyes open. He was exhausted, his little body battling sleep. She knelt beside him, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Listen, buddy," she said softly. "The police are looking for your parents, but until they find them, you can stay right here with me. You're safe now, okay?" Ethan blinked up at her, eyes glossy with drowsiness. Then, he did something Olivia didn't expect. He reached out, his tiny fingers wrapping around hers. It was such a simple gesture, but in that moment, she felt the weight of his trust settle deep within her. He had no one else in the world right now, and somehow, she had become his anchor. Behind her, the diner's owner, Mr. Harris, emerged from the back. His arms crossed, his stern expression unreadable. "Olivia, we can't just let some random kid stay here. We're not a shelter." Olivia straightened, fire in her voice. "He's scared, he's hungry, and he's alone," she said firmly. "I won't throw him out into the night." Mr. Harris exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his graying beard. After a long pause, he finally relented.
"Fine.
But if his parents don't show up soon, the authorities will have to handle it." Olivia nodded in understanding, then turned back to Ethan. "You can rest here, buddy. I'll be right here, okay?" Too tired to protest, Ethan curled up in the booth, his small frame sinking into the worn-out cushion. Within minutes, he was asleep. Olivia sat across from him, watching over him like a guardian angel, wondering what kind of parents could lose their child so easily. Somewhere out there, beyond the neon-lit streets, someone was searching for Ethan, someone who would soon change Olivia's life forever. The night dragged on. Olivia stayed put, her eyes fixed on the peaceful rise and fall of Ethan's tiny chest. Every now and then, he would twitch in his sleep, his little fingers clutching at the fabric of his hoodie. She wondered what kind of dreams haunted him. Was he dreaming of being lost, calling for his parents in a sea of strangers? Or was his mind trapped in a darker place, one where he truly was alone? Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar jingle of the diner's bell. Olivia turned instinctively, expecting either the police or a late-night customer. Instead, two well-dressed strangers stepped inside. A man and a woman, their anxious eyes frantically scanning the room. The woman clutched her chest, her breath hitching. And, in that moment, Olivia knew. This was Ethan's family. And her night was far from over. Breath the man tall, with a commanding presence searched every corner until his eyes landed on Ethan the woman. Gasped the child, stirred at the sound of his name, his small body stretching as he blinked awake the moment his gaze met the woman's. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Mommy," the woman rushed forward, tears spilling down her face as she dropped to her knees and pulled Ethan into a desperate embrace. "Oh, my baby. We've been looking everywhere for you." Ethan clung to her, his little hands fisting her coat. "I got lost," he whispered, his voice breaking. The man knelt beside them, his hand resting gently on Ethan's back. "We thought we lost you forever," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Olivia stood frozen, watching the reunion unfold. Relief flooded her, but a question lingered in the back of her mind. Who were they? Their expensive coats, their polished shoes, the way they carried themselves. They didn't look like ordinary parents. After a few moments, the woman wiped her tears and turned to Olivia, her eyes full of gratitude. You took care of him," Olivia nodded. "He walked in alone, hungry and scared. I couldn't just turn him away." The man stood, his piercing gaze locked on Olivia, as if studying her. "You fed him?" Looked after him. "Yes." A deep silence filled the air before the man suddenly exhaled, as if making a decision. He reached into coat pocket and pulled out a small, sleek business card. He handed it to Olivia with a firm nod. "My name is Richard Lancaster," he said. "This is my wife, Claire. We own Lancaster Enterprises." Olivia's stomach dropped. Lancaster Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar corporation. She had read about them in newspapers. These weren't just any parents, they were one of the wealthiest families in the city. CLA took a step forward, gripping Olivia's hands tightly. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to our son." Her voice trembled with emotion. "You saved him, and we will never forget that." Olivia shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just gave him a meal in a place to rest. That's exactly what makes it special," Richard said, his tone firm. "In a world where people ignore what's right in front of them, you stepped up. You showed kindness when you didn't have to." Ethan tugged on his mother's coat. "Mommy, she was really nice to me." He turned to Olivia, his innocent eyes filled with sincerity. "Thank you." Olivia felt a lump in her throat. "Anytime, buddy." Richard exchanged a glance with CLA, and something unspoken passed between them. Then he turned back to Olivia. "Do you like working here?" The question caught her off guard. "It's a job," she admitted, shrugging. "It pays the bills." Richard tilted his head. "Do you have bigger dreams?" Olivia hesitated. No customer had ever asked her that before. She had always pushed her own dreams aside, focusing on survival instead. But deep down, she had always wanted to do more, to study, to build something of her own. Claire smiled knowingly. "We'd like to help." Olivia blinked in confusion. "Help?" How? Richard reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a checkbook. He scribbled something down, then tore out the check and placed it gently on the Consider this a small token of gratitude. Olivia's hands trembled as she picked it up. The number made her breath hitch. It wasn't just enough to pay her bills, it was enough to change her life. Her head snapped up. I can't accept this. CLA stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Olivia's arm. Please, you helped our son when he needed it most. Let us do the same for you. Olivia's eyes burned with unshed tears. No one had ever done something like this for her, for the first time in a long time, she felt seen, truly seen. Ethan grinned. Now you can eat with me next time. Olivia laughed through her tears, ruffling his hair. You got it, kiddo. As the Lancaster family walked out, Olivia stood there, check in hand, her heart pounding. One act of kindness had led to this, a moment that would change everything, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in miracles. What do you think? Would you have accepted the check? Let me know in the comments.